Hi everyone, Mike here. So today I had a thought I wanted to share based on a conversation I had this week and some things in the news. And so I wanted to find this book on my bookshelf. I read it some time back, really interesting. It was made by the same publishing company that Robert Kiyosaki works with. He did that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He did Cash Flow Quadrant. And the name of this book is Tax-Free Wealth, How to Build Massive Wealth by Permanently Lowering Your Taxes. Now, if you watched my last video, I talked about the 14 different things that a person can do to put more cash flow into their pocket every single month. And that's without actually having to work a second job, work overtime, or having some kind of side hustle. Now, the first thing I focused on was this idea of getting a tax return. A lot of people are excited when they get their tax return in April because they might get a couple $1,000s that they didn't have. But essentially that means that they've gotten $2,000 or $3,000, sometimes up to $5,000 of money that they worked for, but they didn't have access to over the whole year. So I talked about how to increase your withholdings and how to use that money in your benefit over the whole year rather than getting that tax return. That way you can actually put it somewhere that's going to earn interest for you. But I wanted to address this idea of being an employee versus being self-employed. Right? In Cash Flow Quadrant, Robert Kiyosaki talks about being an employee, being self-employed, being a business owner, and being an investor. Now, I don't want to get into all the details about that entire concept, but I think that there is a benefit to being self-employed over being an employee. What prompted this conversation was some things in the news that took place. Now, everybody knows that on Monday, the Supreme Court came out with a decision. It was a 6-3 decision that said that private companies are no longer able to discriminate against people on reasons of sexual identity or gender or LGBT persuasion. This actually was in conjunction with the anti-discrimination law that passed in 1964 that said roughly the same thing, that employers were not allowed to discriminate or terminate somebody on the basis of their race or ethnicity. And naturally, lots of people applauded that. At the same time this week, the governor of Illinois stated that he wanted to make Election Day a state holiday. This would give people the right to take the day off so they can actually participate in a democratic process and be able to vote accordingly. Now, I think there's a lot more of an agenda behind that than just getting more people to vote. Because honestly, if they wanted more people to vote, why not just make Election Day on Saturday or on a Sunday instead of on the second Tuesday of the month of November? Regardless of that fact, people applauded that too. Now, what do these two things actually have in common? Well, they have in common the fact that they are additional benefits that are provided to employees that happen at the expense of the employers. Now, this has been a conversation in America for well over 100 years. There have been labor disputes and protests and all kinds of things because employees expect to have certain rights given to them. Now, for one, I don't believe that people should be discriminated against based on sexual identity, based on sexual preference, or racism, or ethnicity, right? I'm in favor of making it a fair playing field for everybody. But what most people don't understand is that the Supreme Court has now opened up the floodgates for a plethora of lawsuits to come, right? You see, the employee contract is based on work performance. You are expected to do a certain amount of work for a certain amount of pay. And we all know that employees tend to milk these employers, right? They will slack off, they'll be on their phone playing on Facebook or surfing the internet or come in late to work or go home early. There's all kinds of ways that employees can game the system. And still employers will give them their paycheck every single week. The reality is that most employers will pay you just enough so you can keep your job and not quit. At the same time, the employee will do just enough work so the employer doesn't have a reason to fire them, right? But as I mentioned, for over 100 years, this relationship between employees and employers has been about a myriad of different things. There's all kinds of benefits that people want, right? So we have federal holidays, we have state holidays, we have sick days, we have vacation days, we have benefits like medical benefits, we have unemployment insurance, we have retirement benefits, and these are all negotiated between employee and employers. And of course, once again, we don't want employees to be harassed or discriminated against based on any kind of identity that they have in themselves. But that's not really the conversation I'm trying to have. I wanted to talk about the difference between being an employee and being self-employed and the benefits you actually get by being self-employed or being a contractor rather than being an employee. In this book, Tax-Free Wealth, the author talks about the tax code and how it was written by entrepreneurs. Now, the reality is the tax code in this country was written by entrepreneurs because the government sees entrepreneurs as a way of boosting and growing the economy. Now, naturally, at the same time, the government wants to take our wealth, essentially steal it, right? As a libertarian, we all know that taxation is theft, and they want to create their own income streams. And we can have a whole conversation about whether that's right or wrong. But from the tax code perspective, the author says that the United States tax code has 5,800 pages in the tax code. Of that, only 30 pages actually denote how to pay taxes. That means that there's 5,770 pages in the tax code to tell you how to get out of paying taxes. Now, here's the thing. As employees, we know that taxes are automatically taken from your paycheck, right? And as self-employed people, that you are actually responsible for paying those taxes. Now, I think that the government did this intentionally because if employees knew how much money they're actually taking from them and where they're going, they would revolt, right? So they just cleverly found a way to distinguish an employee from a self-employed person. So you'll have the W-2 form and you have the 1099, right? They take a certain amount of money from you every single week, and as I mentioned in the last video, you can change those deductions, and that's how much they'll take from you. As a self-employed person, now you're obligated to pay taxes at the end of the year. However, what's really interesting is in those 5,700 pages that talk about how to avoid paying taxes, there are a great number of benefits to being self-employed. I have here a list of things that I look at as I've been self-employed for about 5 years and no longer work for somebody else as an employee. Now, not only that, right away, the benefit I have for being a self-employed is I get to decide when and with whom I want to work. I get to decide how many hours I want to work. I'm not obligated to come in at a certain time. There's nobody that's going to tell me that I'm late. There's nobody that's going to tell me I'm going home early. I don't have to beg for overtime. I really just do a job and I get paid based on the outcome of that job, right? A lot of people don't like that because they don't want to assume that risk. But the benefits of being self-employed are endless. I literally not only can come and go as I please, but I also get all kinds of tax benefits. Right? Every single business expense I have as a self-employed contractor will literally help me reduce my tax obligation. Right? That's contained in the 5,700 pages. So any kind of office expenses I may have. Right? If you have a home office, right, you get to actually write off the expenses in your home. The computer you use, the phone that you use, any supplies you use, whether you're shipping, things like stamps and shipping costs, right? Any kind of office rent that you have, all that is deductible. Not to mention advertising costs, right? Business cards, job fairs that you go to, any kind of licensing or education that you need as a self-employed person to benefit your trade. You have auto expenses. Did you know that you can actually deduct, I think it's up to 57 cents per mile for any place that you go to while you're actually performing your work? You have travel expenses. You can write off your plane tickets and your expenses for going out of town, your lodging and your meals. Literally now you no longer have vacations, you have business trips, right? Any kind of other utilities that you use in your office. So all those things are beneficial to you to actually be able to use as legal deductions as a self-employed person. In a lot of cases, people who are self-employed or have a business, they may also have a job. So while the government is taking your money from your paycheck and you have a certain tax obligation for being married or being single, you can actually use your business deductions against your income at your job. All right, now, I do advise you to seek your tax advisor to understand the plethora of all these things. But here's the conversation I found interesting. If you are self-employed, you can work for anybody you want, whether or not that person is discriminatory or not. You don't have to worry about what rights you have because you happen to be LGBT, or because you happen to be a certain race, or because you happen to be a certain gender. If you don't like the person you're working for, then you don't have to work for them. You don't have to sue and have lawsuits because you're not getting some kind of benefit or some kind of right that's not protected, right? Now, at the same time, you also don't have to worry about what days off you have, right? The conversation that prompted this thought was whether or not you should have a right to have election day off, which is once every 4 years or once every 2 years, or whether you should have Columbus Day off. My question would be, well, if you want Columbus Day off, why not St. Patrick's Day off? Why not Valentine's Day off? Why not any number of holidays off that you want? You're going to fight for those, right? Again, at the expense of the employer. Why should we have this fight where the employee and the employer is actually going to be determining what benefits, what rights, what freedoms people have? When you have the freedom to generate any kind of income you want as a self-employed person, you get 5,700 pages of deductions that you can have. You can determine any kind of benefits you want, and it really is the only way to become wealthy. I really think that employment in this country needs to change. We need to get rid of the employer-employee relationship and have everybody be contractors, right? You want to do a certain job function, then you can do a certain job function. Now, naturally, when you're an employer and you're looking for contractors, you're going to be able to hire people who have certain expertise, who have certain skills. Now, at the same time, you have a certain loyalty factor where you know that self-employed people are not going to be loyal to your company. You're going to be more loyal to the company that takes care of you, right? That gives you benefits, that gives you the freedom that you want, the anti-discrimination laws and all that stuff. But I really think that the right way to be free and independent is to become a self-employed contractor. Then we can do away with all these anti-discrimination laws. Then we can do away with all these benefits that people demand, right? The employers will be generally happier. And as a self-employed person, you can control how you come and go. You don't have to worry about whether you're calling in sick, whether you have a vacation day, whether or not you get to go vote, because you just take the day off. And so just something I want to leave with you all. Hope it benefits you. Have a great day.